Welcome to Surrender School. This is the science of Step 1. This is what I would consider a deep dive exploration into our actual powerlessness. This information was very critical to me in my own recovery, and I'm excited to share it with you. It may or may not be important for your recovery. If it is, awesome. If it's not, ignore it. I want to give you my basic caveats and disclaimers for all the workshops that I do, and that is that I am not a program expert. I'm not a guru. I don't have all the answers. I don't even know what all the questions are. I'm not claiming that my way of working step 1 is the right way or the only way. There are many ways to work the 12 steps. Thank you, higher power, for that. Then I want to talk about some caveats and disclaimers for this specific workshop, okay? First and foremost, I want you to understand that I am not a medical doctor. I am not a scientist, nor am I an expert in any way, shape, or form on obesity, period, okay? I am just a food addict who was desperate to understand my disease in hopes of recovering from it. I am going to share with you what I did and specific information about what I did, but always, always, always check with your doctor first before you make any changes in your food program, okay? I also want to say right off the top that the body is amazingly complex. And obesity involves a lot of different systems that have been dysregulated, and they all impact each other. But out of necessity, in order to explain this stuff, I have to take them one at a time. But I want you to understand that they're all working together, all together. It's not like our physical allergy works separately from our mental obsession. They all work closely together. And I also want to be very emphatic about this point. Do you need to know any of what is in this workshop in order to recover? And I am telling you, absolutely not. You do not need to know any of this in order to recover, but it really helped me, and that's why I'm doing this workshop. The science explained my powerlessness to me in a way that really clicked for me and really made it possible for me to become and stay abstinent. And lastly, I don't want you to mistake my interest in the science of our disease as downplaying the importance of the 12 steps. The 12 steps are the most important guides to my life, and they are the lens through which I see and view everything, and they were critical to my ability to recover. So don't think that this means I'm downplaying the spiritual aspects of the program, or that this is supposed to replace the spiritual aspects of the program. Not at all. I am not saying that at all. I am going to go over these caveats and disclaimers every single session because I want you to remember them, okay? I know my own limitations, and I want you to know them as well, okay? All right. If we let the situation we are in inform our actions, then we learn to cope with life. That's a statement out of Alan Berger's book, Emotional Sobriety. And Joy C., in her infinite wisdom, brought it down to really mean something to food addicts. If we let the truth, the science of how our body works, inform our actions, then we learn to cope with our disease in a way that works for us. Just because we are powerless over the ocean doesn't mean we can't learn how to surf on it. We can't make the ocean do what we want it to do, but we can learn how to live with it. Just like we can't make our brains and bodies do what we want them to do around food, but we can learn to live with it, okay, successfully and be happy. Now, I am going to tell my story today as an avenue toward explaining the different models of obesity, as well as over the next 6 sessions, you're going to learn the science, and my story is going to illuminate the way that that science shows up in our lives as food addicts. Okay, you're going to see in my story, as we go through the science, you're going to see your own experience and the general experience of food addicts. So that's why I'm going to tell my story today. So I'm going to start with what it was like. Very unhappy, very sick. You can see from this picture, very sick and unhappy. I was very metabolically ill in my obesity. And this is close to my highest weight. And it really took me a long time to find 2 pictures because yeah, I didn't have pictures of me at my top weight. I didn't let myself get my picture taken, and anything I did have, I got rid of. So I was a really sickly and skinny little kid. Our housekeeper used to feed me slices of Wonder Bread slathered with butter and mounds of either white sugar or brown sugar on top. She desperately wanted to fatten me up because in her mind, a skinny kid was an unhealthy kid. And she must have really done a good job because by the time I was about 7 or 8, I became overweight. And I will tell you that I know the very moment when it came into my consciousness that I was overweight and that it was bad. It was at an annual pediatrician visit. My mother brought me in, and I will never forget. I still remember the doctor's name, Dr. Gunderson, and I will never forget the look of disgust and contempt on his face about my weight. He was disgusted by me. He acted like it, and he didn't hide it from me. And it was the first time I ever felt shame around like my body and eating and what I was eating. You know, up until that moment, I'd never really thought about it. I was just doing my kid life. And that was when I got introduced to the moral model of obesity. Now, this model of obesity labels obesity as gluttony and considers it a sin, a moral failing that you should be deeply ashamed of. And believe me, after that doctor's visit, I was deeply ashamed. This model assumes that you are overeating willingly and by choice, and that you could stop if you wanted to. In essence, you have complete control over your eating behavior and your food and your weight, and you are immoral because you don't choose to control it. I took on that lesson. I deeply took on that lesson. Now, for better or worse, my parents ignored the doctor completely, and things just went on as usual in my household. We always had dessert after dinner every night, and it wasn't fruit. It was dessert. It was cakes and pies and cookies and that kind of stuff. We had, now I was the only obese person in my family. We had 4 snack cupboards, 4 cupboards in our kitchen that were completely dedicated to snacks. One was over top of the oven and it had all the different chips. So all the different chips, all the different flavors of chips, Fritos, all the variations of chips. Then there was an entire cupboard full of cookies and crackers, all kinds of cookies, all kinds of crackers. Then there was my father's snack cupboard, which of course we all raided all the time. And then there was an entire cupboard that was dedicated just to different flavors of soda. And I had access to this stuff whenever I wanted it. And I will never forget the annual, and we're coming up on it right now, the annual Girl Scout cookie drive. My father, they would kill each other, tripping over each other just to get to my father to get his order, because he ordered anywhere from 3 to 5 boxes of every single flavor of cookie. And the family would binge on these cookies for the next month or two. And I am telling you about this food environment that I grew up in, because food environment turns out to be pretty darn important. If I were surrounded by celery, I'm not saying I wouldn't have been a food addict, but it made it very easy for me to be a food addict in my household. And in sessions 2, 4, and 5, we're going to talk a little bit more about how important food environment is for us. I got a weekly allowance. My father thought it was very important that I should be able to go to the movies every week. And so it covered the cost of the movie, popcorn, and candy, and soda. And I did that. So all of my allowance either went to that or it went to candy. I also developed an incredible ability to sneak food silently, because I was deeply ashamed now of what I looked like and how I ate. And I knew something was wrong with me and I was bad. I was very bad for the way I ate, but I couldn't stop. So I snuck food, and I developed a way that I could open a chip bag, you know, those crinkly bags. I could open one of those silently. And I got very good at it. And this was around the time, like around 9 or 10, when I started to begin to notice the actual effect that my binge foods had on me. I began to notice that once I started, I couldn't stop. I could no longer pilfer 3 cookies. I had to take the entire box or bag of cookies. And I began to notice that. And I just thought something was wrong with me. And I was bad for it, but I did it because I had to. I also suffered a lot of humiliation at school. I was teased and bullied for my weight. I think, I look at pictures of myself. Well, actually, when I had pictures of myself back then, I could see it wasn't as bad as like it was in my mind. I think I would have been considered, like slightly overweight, kind of semi-normal kid now. But back then, I was the only fat kid in class and I stuck out like a sore thumb. And there were these, I don't know if they do it anymore, but twice a year they had these public weigh-ins at school. And your class would be called down to the gymnasium and they would weigh you and write it down in some record they kept of you. And that would have been bad enough, but they didn't just weigh you and then write down the number. They yelled out the number. And I was thoroughly humiliated, and it gave more ammunition for the people that were teasing me and bullying me. And I had to undergo this every year from age 7 or 8 until 12 through 6th grade. And I had to undergo this twice a year, and it was horrifying. And this was when I was introduced to the character model of obesity. Now, this model states that you overeat due to a flawed character. This model believes that you have willpower, you're just choosing not to exert it. This is what the kids teasing and bullying taught me, that I am lazy and I'm just not trying hard enough. This model assumes that you are overeating willingly and by choice, and that you could stop if you just tried hard enough. This was when I had a desperate desire to stop, but I couldn't. I could not stop. So being embarrassed by this flawed character that I apparently had, I tried to lose weight really hard. I put myself on my first diet at age 12. And if some of you are old enough to remember, the diet I put myself on was the liquid protein diet. Do any of you guys remember that? It was horrible. You took like 2 tablespoons of these disgusting tasting amino acids for breakfast and then at lunch, and then you were supposed to eat a sensible, in quotes, dinner. And that's what I put myself on. And my parents must have been okay with it because they're the ones that bought me it. I mean, I hadn't even gone through puberty yet. And I was on this diet. I put myself on. Now, it was also at this time, it was also at this time that I joined my first gym. Because of course you have to exercise, right? So the housekeeper would drop me off on her way home from work at the gym, and my mother would pick me up on her way home from work, so that I had like this hour that this little 12-year-old chubby kid was going to work out. And I will tell you that there were so many times my mother would come pick me up at the gym, and she would take me across the street to the Baskin Robbins ice cream place, buy me an ice cream cone, and then take me home for dinner. It was crazy making. And I was 12 and a food addict. I'm not going to say no. It doesn't matter that I'm desperately trying to lose weight. It doesn't matter that I just got out of the gym and I'm sitting there in my little tights and leotard, getting my double scoop of whatever it was I got. It was insane. Again, food environment, right? At age 15, I talked my parents into sending me to fat camp. This was the summer right before I transitioned into high school. It was in the Pocono Mountains in Laxawaxen, Pennsylvania. It was a Weight Watchers camp for fat kids. I have to tell you, I loved it. I have wonderful memories from this place. Everyone else looked like me. I wasn't self-conscious. I got to do all this stuff that I never would have done in my normal school because I would have been teased. It was great. I have wonderful memories from that camp, and I did lose weight, and I managed to keep it off for only about the first semester of my 10th grade year, and then I gained it all back, of course. Further on in high school, I became a giant pothead. The food wasn't working as well as it used to. I needed more food in order to get the same effect. It was the progression of my disease. And we'll look at this process in more detail when we explore the neurotransmitter dopamine in, I think it's the 4th session, when we talk about that. But I was experiencing the progression of my disease, and I was experiencing tolerance to my drug of choice, which was food. So I added pot, and you could eat a lot more when you smoked pot. So that's what it was all about for me. Now, I want to stop here briefly and talk about the violence that I lived through in my home as a kid. Now, while all of this weight-related stuff was going on for me, I also lived with a father who was violent, and it was not alcohol-related. Um, my parents were two very highly educated scientists. My father fought in World War II and got his PhD in physics using the GI Bill. My mother fought her own Herculean battles to get her PhD in chemistry in an era when women did not do those sorts of things. Both of them came from poor, uneducated families. I do not know how they managed to do what they did, but they did. I am immensely proud of their accomplishments, and I know they loved me very much, and I loved them very much. They did the best they could, but they were not good parents. My father suffered from what I know now was undiagnosed and untreated PTSD from the war. He had a hair trigger temper, and he was physically violent with my older brother and sister. I was never hit, but I watched a lot of violence. I got really good at predicting when my father was going to blow. I could tell from a just slight change in his voice or a clench in his jaw. I got to be able to read my father very well, and I would hide. I knew it was coming and I would hide. I had hiding spaces all over the house. I even had some outside of the house in the yard. I had some hiding places. So I got really good at predicting it and hiding it when I knew it was coming. My mother dealt with all of this by simply not being home. You know, she worked all day and then she was involved in clubs and other social activities outside of the home in the evenings and on weekends. Now, I believe this violence is one factor of many that contributed to my food addiction. I believe with all of my heart that even if that had not been part of my history, I would still be a food addict today. And you'll see that as we go through these sessions, you'll see why I think that way. But I will be talking about the effects of abuse, neglect, and trauma on food addiction in session 5 when we investigate the stress threat response system and overeating and how it affects eating behavior. So I went to college. I quit smoking pot because it was very easy for me because pot was never my drug of choice. I did learn the joys of binging 3 times a day in the dorm cafeteria. I did not gain the freshman 15, I gained the freshman 50. This is when I was introduced to the energy balance model of obesity. This is the calories in, calories out model. You know, you just need to eat less and exercise more. This model suggests that knowledge will cure you. If you know better, you'll do better. You just need to learn how to eat better and do the right kind of exercise, and then you lose weight. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? This model assumes that the act of eating, again, is under your control, and that the starting and stopping of your eating behavior is under your control. Knowledge and willpower are the keys of success, according to this model. This is the model of all of the pay-in ways. This is the model of all diet books. This is the model I have failed hundreds and hundreds of times using. Okay? Doesn't work. At least doesn't work for me. Obesity is not a mathematical equation. I mean, I know without even seeing all of you that most of you have done that mathematical equation of if I eat this many less calories and I exercise this amount, then I'll lose this amount of weight this week, right? We all have done that insane stuff. It doesn't work like that. Obesity is not a mathematical equation. It is much more complicated than that. And you'll see that as we work through all this stuff. Now, I will tell you that I think some people in program mistakenly still use this model around their abstinence and their food plans. These are the people that are super obsessed with finding the right magical food plan. Like that's the whole answer to this. Our disease is multifactorial, and there are a lot of different factors that contribute to it. And that's what this workshop is about. So I went on to graduate school in psychology. I thought maybe I could educate myself out of my compulsive eating food addiction. Just like the energy balance model suggests, that somehow I could learn to control this, learn to control my eating. Didn't work, of course. I binged and dieted my way through a master's and a PhD. Never did learn how to control my disease. I never did learn how to eat just one cookie and stop. However, there was one pivotal experience during my training that planted a seed that would grow beautifully later on in my life. I worked on several inpatient substance abuse units during my training, and I began to see that my problem with food was exactly like my patients' problems with alcohol. Okay? So there was no internet in those days. Okay, so I'm dating myself. There was no internet in the late 80s, early 90s. And I went to the university library. I tried to find something, anything on food addiction, foodaholism, whatever. There was nothing. There were little scraps and pieces on anorexia, and there was just a hint that they were figuring out there was something called bulimia that went on, but there was nothing about food addiction or compulsive overeating. Nothing. So I got a divorce. Along that education way, I had picked up a husband, and I got a divorce right before my internship year. My ex-husband told me that he was divorcing me because I was too fat. Now, I was fat when he married me, but I believe what really happened is that he didn't want to live with an addict anymore. And I can't blame him for that. We are not easy people to live with. And I know we think we're only hurting ourselves, but that is not true. That is no more true for us than it is for alcoholics or drug addicts. So I can't blame him for that. But this precipitated a crisis in my life that helped me reach rock bottom and helped me come into OA. So this is when I first came into OA at age 28. I don't even remember how I found it. It must have been the newspaper or something, because no internet. I mean, I must have found a meeting being advertised in the paper. So, but I honestly don't remember. And this is when I was introduced to the disease model of obesity. And this is the model of 12-step programs. But I really didn't understand it. And more importantly, I really didn't believe it. I clung on to that energy balance model of obesity, that I just needed to eat less and exercise more. So I came into the rooms. I got a fantastic sponsor. I lost 50 pounds. I kept it off for 5 years. But I used OA as a diet and calories club. Dieting with group support. We've all heard that phrase. My abstinence and food plan were based on the energy balance model of obesity, okay? It was counting calories, trying to exercise, trying to use willpower to not overeat. I did this for 5 years straight, and I never achieved food neutrality. Never had peace in my head around food. So during those 5 years, I maintained a weight loss with what I would consider stark raving abstinence. I was crazy. I never had a spiritual awakening. I was dieting. I was not in what I would consider true recovery. I was thin, but I was not in recovery. Then I started my career, and it became the most important thing in my life without exception. I wasn't sponsoring. I wasn't living in steps 10, 11, and 12. I certainly wasn't enlarging my spiritual life. I did zero self-care. So of course, what did I do? I did what any food addict would do. I relapsed, gained all my weight back plus more. And I spent the next 20 plus years in and out of OA and all the different permutations of it. I tried every single different food 12-step program because I thought they would have the magical answer, and they didn't. My disease progressed. I had less and less ability to string days of abstinence together. First, I could string months together. Then I could only string weeks together. Then I could only string days together. Then I couldn't get from breakfast to lunch abstinently. And we'll go over the science of this kind of progression in the second session. My weight ballooned. I gave up on OA entirely. When I was 44 years old, I got bariatric lap band surgery. It wasn't the Roux-en-Y, it wasn't bypass, but it was just a simple lap band. It didn't cure my addiction, of course. I lost around 40 pounds, which was about half of what I needed to lose. And then I immediately gained it back because I am a very clever, compulsive overeater. I figured out how to work around the restriction of the band. And later, I just had all the saline taken out of the band so that I could binge without any restrictions or problems. I needed my effect. I needed my fix in order to cope with life. And I simply could not deal with life without my alcoholic foods. I came in and out of OA again. You know, I kept trying to get my stark raving abstinence back, like that was something worthwhile obtaining. I would binge before the meeting. I would plan my binge at the meeting. I would binge on the way home. I left OA again. And, you know, nothing is worse than having a head full of program and a stomach full of binge food. I just couldn't take it anymore. So I left. And I lived in misery a few more years. And then at age 55, I tried an outside program. This was a new program. And this is where I was introduced to the science of obesity and addiction. And this is when I truly began to understand the disease model of obesity that program had tried to introduce to me so many years before. So the disease model of obesity sees obesity as being caused by hormonal, neurochemical, metabolic, and cellular dysregulation and dysfunction. I don't see anything in there about a flawed character. In this model, obesity is considered the same as my asthma. This model does not assume that you have control over your eating behavior or your weight. It's not your fault that you have obesity any more than it's my fault that I have asthma. This model sees obesity as a chronic illness that you will have to manage for the rest of your life, just like program tells us. So the bottom line here is biochemistry drives our behavior. Our behavior does not drive our biochemistry. In other words, overeating and inactivity are the result of the problem. They do not cause the problem. I had nothing to do personally with the fact that I was a food addict. Nothing I did or said or believed made me a food addict. I was made one. It was my biochemistry. So this outside program that I went to was amazing. I finally understood how my disease worked. And after almost 2 decades of not being able to lose any weight at all, over a year, I lost 60 pounds and I kept it off for 9 seconds and then I gained it all back. So I just tried harder. I lost 60 pounds again over the next year. And this time I kept it off for 3 seconds and gained it all back. Okay, clearly I'm missing something, right? This is the point when I came back into OA and I actually got recovery. The outside program gave me the science behind my powerlessness, but it couldn't give me the necessary power to put it all in action. It was an in-depth study of step 1, although it wasn't presented as that. But I'm an addict. I needed 11 more steps. The science was a necessary, but not sufficient piece of my recovery. I needed to combine the science of what I had learned with the spiritual solution that OA offers. That was the magical secret sauce for me, was the interaction of those two things. So this time, when I came back into program, I stumbled across a quote by Lori C. that blew the door wide open to my recovery. If the steps aren't working for you, then maybe you're not working the steps in a way that works for you. This allowed me to approach program in an entirely different way. It gave me permission to find the way to work the steps that worked for me. This is how I approach program and my recovery now. I define my abstinence as entire abstinence from my alcoholic foods. My food plan is not my abstinence. My food plan is merely a tool to help me reach and maintain a healthy weight. I practice my abstinence perfectly, and I do the best I can with my food plan. And when I make a mistake on my food plan, I make sure that I learn from it. I am 100% responsible for my abstinence and my recovery. No one can do this for me. My higher power will not take the fork out of my hand. I really wanted that to be true, but it was never true for me. I'm responsible for working with the science of obesity and addiction, not against it. I'm responsible for working my program daily, enlarging my spiritual life and my conscious contact with my higher power. I'm responsible for all of this so I can stay in recovery for just another day, just another 24 hours. I have no expectation that my abstinence and recovery will be easy or free from emotional and physical discomfort. Gosh, I wish that weren't true. There is no magical food plan that will make abstinence, weight loss, or weight maintenance easy and painless. There are things I can do to work with my body, but it is never easy or painless, or at least I have not found that to be true for me. Sometimes I just have to sit with this discomfort, and there's nothing to do about it, particularly when I was first getting abstinent. There are no magical or all-powerful sponsors who have all the answers. I was also willing to do the work of developing a concept of a higher power that would work for me based on what I believe in, based on the way that I believe the world works. I didn't try to believe things that I simply don't believe in. This was when I became willing to do the work of developing a relationship with this higher power that could sustain me. My program is a mix of science, spirituality, psychology, and personal development, because that is what works for me. I do lots of experiments to see what works for me. I keep what works and I dump the rest. Are there any questions before I go on?
Linda, there are no questions in the chat at this time. If anybody's
Okay.
interested in asking a question, please put it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go on. So I want to define some concepts here. So I want to talk about 4 important concepts in human behavior that have been really important to me in looking at the science of step 1. Learning the science taught me deeply about free will, personal responsibility, shame, and powerlessness. It wasn't this was my first spiritual awakening, that this understanding that my disease was not a failure on my part. It was not a personal failure. It had nothing to do with me personally, as a matter of fact. I had nothing to do with it. It was just a result of my biology. And when I fight my biology, I lose every single time. So the dictionary definition of free will is the power or capacity of a human being for self-direction. Now, all of us like to think that we are in charge of our own behavior. And it's natural to think and believe that all of our behavior is under our direct conscious control because it just feels that way, particularly when it comes to our eating. We believe we made the conscious decision to binge. The science tells us this isn't true. The big book tells us that we have lost the power of choice when it comes to our alcoholic foods. In other words, we don't have free will around food. And the science tells us this as well. The science tells us that decisions to eat or binge are made at a lower, non-conscious level of the brain. These decisions are made in the parts of our brain that operate without any conscious awareness on our part. We are not in charge of them. For example, we can consciously decide to hold our breath, but in the end, our brain takes over and we will breathe. It's just a fact, even though we are trying not to. Our brain will override that desire and we will take a breath eventually. And believe it or not, it works the same way with our addictive eating. Decisions are made at this lower, non-conscious level of our brain. Then that part of our brain tells our conscious thinking part of our brain what to do. Go to the store and get that binge food. Once you eat, your brain and body will keep you eating. That same brain and body that made you breathe is what makes you eat. We'll dive into this in detail in a future session. And I believe this is my theory of what the scientific basis is for the strange mental blank spot. The next concept I want to take a quick look at is personal responsibility. And the definition of that is taking full responsibility for your actions, decisions, thoughts, and attitudes. The disease model and the science don't see your obesity or your food addiction as being your fault. But, and this is a very important but, they don't release you from personal responsibility. They just put the responsibility in a different place. You aren't personally responsible for stopping eating after having one piece of pizza. This isn't where your personal responsibility belongs. It belongs in being responsible to set yourself up for success so you don't start eating pizza in the first place. We are not responsible for having the disease, but we are responsible for managing our disease and for taking our medicine. This idea has been critical to my recovery. I am 100% responsible for doing what I need to do to be abstinent and in recovery. No one else, not even my higher power, is going to do that for me. I don't expect anyone to do it for me, but I do expect, and I can rely on my higher power 100% of the time to give me guidance, strength, and courage to manage my disease. But I don't expect my higher power to take my disease away from me, make it not exist. I will always have it. I am responsible for setting myself up for success. I am going to say this over and over and over again during this workshop. The science has shown me how to set myself up for success, what medicine to take, and how and when to take it. And my higher power gives me guidance on all of this and helps me do it, gives me the necessary power to be able to do it. Let me be clear here. Shame around our disease allows us to give up and live in self-pity. It makes us feel victimized by our disease. Personal responsibility empowers us. Shame is according to the dictionary, a highly unpleasant, self-conscious emotion arising from the sense that there is something deeply and fundamentally wrong with you. Don't we all feel this way around our food addiction? I know I did. With every molecule of my being, I felt that shame. We develop this shame around our food addiction because of all the different messages from our family, our friends, our doctors, our diet books, our freaking culture that we grow up in. Then we come into program and fine tune our shame because now we are supposed to have our solution, but we are still eating. We lie to our fellows about our eating, and even worse, we lie to our sponsors about our eating. That's why when I sponsor, I only have one rule, one requirement, and that is be 100% honest with me about your food. We must take the shame out of this disease so we can recover. As long as we're in shame, we are the victim. We are victimizing ourselves. Okay. Shame is not a tool for change. Remember when they used to tell us that we should put our fattest picture of ourselves on the refrigerator and that would keep us from eating? Never did a damn thing for me. Shame makes us give up on ourselves. Shame makes us believe we aren't worthy of recovery. Shame over our eating prevents us from seeking the help we need. Last concept is powerlessness. The dictionary definition is lack of ability, influence, or power, lacking authority to act. And powerlessness is what we are admitting to in step one, right? That's what we are admitting to. We are powerless over food. And the big book tells us that we must not have any lurking notion that someday we will be able to eat cheesecake and pizza like normal people. I have no doubts about my powerlessness anymore. The science shows me exactly how I am truly powerless over my alcoholic foods. I don't fight my disease or the way my brain and body work because I am powerless over them, over how they work. I embrace my powerlessness. I no longer feel victimized by it. My powerlessness guides my attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors every single day. It is my anchor, my touchstone. I can depend and rely on my powerlessness 100%. My powerlessness will never fail me. It is the place where my higher power and I meet in every minute of my day. I trust my powerlessness completely. I will always be powerless over my alcoholic foods, and I will always be powerless over how my brain and body work. Now, I have a few closing thoughts here for today. Just because we can't control our disease doesn't mean we can't learn to manage it by working with our brains and bodies, not against them. We stop expecting our brains and bodies to do things they are not capable of doing. We stop pretending we have control or even should have control over our alcoholic foods. We have no ability from a biological perspective to manage, control, or sanely eat our alcoholic foods, period. That is what powerlessness means. Over the next 6 sessions, I'm going to explain the powerlessness of our disease through science, or at least my understanding of it. Remember, I'm not an expert in any way. I'm going to explain what I did to get abstinent and lose weight. I'm also going to talk about how I maintain my abstinence and weight loss. And please remember, I am not saying this is the only way to get abstinent or to recover. This is just what worked for me. This is my experience, strength, and hope. If it doesn't resonate with you, if it doesn't mean anything to you, if it doesn't click for you, drop it and go find what does. Because all I wish for you is recovery. That is my deepest, deepest wish for everyone who has our disease, because I know the suffering of being in it, what that feels like. There may be a temptation to feel victimized by the information I'm going to be sharing with you over the next 6 weeks. And you can look at it that way if you want to. But I chose to look at this information as giving me the keys to get out of prison. I was really empowered by this information. I finally saw that my addiction wasn't my fault. I didn't have a weak character. I wasn't devoid of willpower. My disease wasn't my choice at all. It was just a fact. This information gave me the keys to managing my disease on a daily basis, and my higher power helps me navigate all this information and gives me the strength and courage to take my medicine. The next session, we're going to go into part 1 of the physical allergy. We're going to take a look at insulin, the hormones insulin and leptin. Session 3 is going to be part 2 of the physical allergy, where we're going to take a look at the biochemistry of the starvation response. Then in session 4, we're going to start into the mental obsession, and we're going to look at dopamine, the neurotransmitter dopamine, and the reward circuitry in our brain. And then we're going to take, in session 5, we're going to do part 2 of the mental obsession, and we're going to take a look at the stress response and cortisol in our bodies and see how that affects our eating and eating behavior. Session 6, we're going to talk about self-care, sleep, and epigenetics, and I'll go over what that is. And self-care, yes, sometimes self-care is a hot bubble bath, but there's a heck of a lot more to it than that. And in session 7, I'm going to try and put it all together with program and kind of show you how I mix it all together for myself. And I want to be very clear, none of this is original to me, obviously. I have read these books. The workshop is a conglomeration of the information in all of these. I would recommend any and all of them. And this list is also on the website for the section for this workshop. They are all listed there as well. So next week, we're going to start digging into the first half of our disease, the physical allergy, and we'll be exploring insulin resistance and leptin resistance and how they drive our disease. And that is it for me.
The question is that the person finds it interesting that the new weight loss drugs are targeting a portion of the brain that's stimulating certain substances. Not only is it working on food addiction, but alcohol and drugs as well. The side effects are awful. I agree with that, but confirms the science that Linda is discussing. The question is, how do sponsors guide sponsees who think that the answer is only with the chemical addiction and can be solved with Ozempic or similar drugs? We still have to deal with the lack of faith in our higher power or thinking we can control our lives and people around us.
Amen to that. Okay. Yes, this is probably one of the first drugs that there's a couple of ways that it works. One of the ways that it works is it makes people more insulin sensitive, and you'll learn more about that in the next session and why that's important for weight loss. And it does decrease the chatter, and it is decreasing the reward that food gives the brain. It decreases the amount of reward the brain gets from the food. So essentially what it does is it decreases the level of the effect. Now, and it also does some things around like slowing the emptying of the stomach so you don't get a blood sugar spikes and stuff like that. Now, it does make people lose weight, and you cannot argue with that. It does. The side effects are awful. Yes, they are. But I know a lot. I mean, hell, I had surgery. I mean, I would have been willing if someone would have said 100% that that the drug would solve all of my problems, because that's what they said for the lap band, and it didn't. I would do it. I would go through any side effects in order to lose weight, right? I was desperate. So I bet you your sponsees are too. They do know that if you go off the drug, you will regain the weight plus some more, like you always do when you regain weight. So you would have to be on it forever. And for some people, that's okay. The part that I'm the most concerned about is that they do not know what the long-term effects are of giving a drug developed for diabetes to non-diabetic people. So they don't know, like, okay, so you take this thing and you're going to stay on it forever. Do you have any negative effects at year 5 or year 8 or year 10? They don't know any of those things because it hasn't been around. How would I approach that with sponsees? I would tell them, like the big book says, if you think you can do it, you march out there and you try it. And if it doesn't work, you come back and talk to me. If you are wanting to, if you're wanting to maintain a sponsorship relationship with a person while they're on the drug, this is how I would handle it, and this is just me. I have no moral or judgment against people using whatever they feel they need to use to combat this disease. It's a horrible disease. I've lived with it most of my life. People who don't have this disease have no idea how much suffering is entailed in it. So I don't give anyone a hard time about wanting to do whatever it is they think they want to do. Would I sponsor someone if they wanted to try it? My personal way of thinking is yes, I would. I would continue to try and do it because my belief is that eventually they will fail on it. People do reach a certain level of plateau where they can't lose all of their weight. They lose a certain amount and then they tend to plateau and level off and it just stays there. So they may fail it that way. They may not be able to tolerate the side effects. They may not be able to continue to afford it. So they get off of it and then they'll regain their weight. And so I think eventually they will come back to the realization that there is no magic answer for this disease. But your last sentence of that question is probably the most important, because that is, we still have to deal with the lack of faith in a higher power or thinking we can control our lives and people around us. And there ain't no drug or surgery that's going to tell us and show us how to do that. The food, this whole thing, what we are going to be talking about in this entire workshop and what Ozempic does is all just step 1. And if it were only step 1, there wouldn't be 11 other steps. That's the real magic of program. That's the real magic, is learning how to live happily without trying to control everybody and everything around us. It's our addiction to control. That's our real problem. Like, I mean, the big book goes into it in detail, talking about step 3. Beautifully. Some of the most beautiful written literature of all time is the step 3 pages. And so I would say, go ahead and try it. It's like your sponsee telling you that they aren't allergic to ice cream, right? That they don't have a physical allergy to ice cream. Okay, go ahead and try it. Do the experiment, see what data you get, and then you can go on from there. So that's how I would handle that. Other people, I think, would handle it very differently.
Next question comes and it says, can you share the emotional dysfunction behind the inability to stay abstinent? Why do you think it becomes harder? I'm sorry, I misspelled that, to stay abstinent?
There are 2 components to this. I mean, it's the reason this happens. And the inability to stay abstinent is not solely just in your mind. There are biochemical reasons why you can't stay abstinent, even after you've put the food down for a while. And it becomes harder to stay abstinent for some of the same reasons. The disease is the physical allergy and the mental obsession. And there's biochemistry for both parts of our disease. One of the most beautiful things that I learned about all of this was that it didn't, and I really seriously mean this, it didn't have anything to do with me personally. The fact that I ate too much and that I couldn't stop eating once I started, and that once I stopped eating, I couldn't stay stopped. None of those things had to do with me as a person. Didn't have anything to do with Linda as a person. It had to do with my biochemistry and the way that my body and brain are made. And because of that, all of the things that led me to the craziness of our disease, like all of the trying to control everybody and all of the, the selfishness, the self-seeking, the fear, the lying, the dishonesty, all those things that they talk about in the big book that we inventory, those are not the cause of the disease. They are the things that are a result of trying to control something we can't control, and that's our food. We become crazy because we're trying to control something that our brains and bodies can't control, because we're made differently than your lean neighbor down the street or your lean best friend or your skinny best friend. We're made differently. This difference and all the things we try to control that difference or change that difference is what makes the emotional dysfunction. And that's why we need program to help us learn things differently. The big book talks about, abstinence is just a bare beginning. We have to be willing to change everything about our lives. Everything we think is true, we have to throw out the window. So I don't see that as leading to the disease. I see the disease as leading to the emotional dysfunction. I hope that answered that. That was a very long answer to that. I'm sorry.
Okay, we will close the meeting with the Serenity Prayer, and you can stay around and ask questions, share, and we'd love to hear from you.
See you next week.